What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football Over-Analysis. Today we're continuing our series looking at the best and worst ADPs in the draft. Today we're going to be talking about round 8. And unfortunately, after we had a pretty decent round in round 7, we've got another round that's pretty rocky with round 8. This one is honestly just as bad, if not worse, than the guys going in round 6. And this is a range in the draft. You'll see when I read off the list of names of guys that we're going to be covering in this round, where there's just not a lot of upside here. You've got a lot of older veterans in this range. You've got some mid-tier quarterbacks. You've got RB handcuffs starting to enter the picture in round 8, which is just completely outrageous. So not a lot of targets that we're going to have coming out of round 8, unfortunately. So in round 8, we have Makai Lemon, Alec Pierce, Chris Godwin, J.K. Dobbins, Justin Herbert, Quentin Johnston, Kyle Monangai, Michael Pittman Jr., Jaxon Dart, Blake Corum, Dak Prescott, and George Kittle. So at the 801, we have Makai Lemon of the Philadelphia Eagles. Lemon was the Eagles' first-round draft pick this season, and again, first-round draft picks usually a bet that we want to make in fantasy football. Lemon, however, has gotten off to a really slow start in training camp. He's been hampered by a hamstring injury the entire time. He has not been able to practice at all yet. And it's at the point now with Lemon where he's missed enough time that it's going to be hard for him to get on the field right away once the season begins. He's going to need to put in time on the practice field and work his way up the depth chart. Until he does that, he's not going to be on the field contributing right away, and he's not someone that you're going to be able to plug into your lineup from day one. Now, you could also make the case that drafting a guy at the top of the 8th round, that's not somebody that you're going to need early in the season. And if you want to make a bet on Lemon at this point and hope that he breaks out towards the second half of the season, that's not the worst bet in the world to make, especially once we go through the rest of this round and see what the other options are at this point in the draft. It's not very good. So betting on a first-round receiver at this range in the draft, you could do a lot worse than Makai Lemon. The other concern that I do have with Lemon, though, is that I think the Eagles are still going to be a run-first team. I don't know that the passing volume is always going to be there to sustain him and make him playable from a fantasy standpoint, even when he's out there fully healthy and he's earned the starting job. But also I feel that a lot of the risk with Makai Lemon is baked into his price right now. There's a reason that he's going at this stage in the draft instead of in the 6th or 7th round with the other first-round receivers like Carnell Tate or Jordan Tyson. So Makai Lemon is not necessarily a target for me, but I also don't hate the idea of taking him at this stage in the draft, especially when you weigh it against what some of your options are going to be at this point. At the 802, we have Alec Pierce of the Indianapolis Colts. And Pierce last season was a pleasant surprise for fantasy owners, catching 47 passes for over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns, finishing as the wide receiver 28 when he was completely free in drafts a year ago. The Colts then reward him with a contract extension in the offseason, but that's about where the good news stops for Alec Pierce. Pierce has been dealing with this mysterious ankle injury over the offseason, and he's still not 100% healed, and not even close either. The Colts have no timetable for his return as of this recording, and he continues to try to get different treatments to try to help speed along the recovery process, and nothing seems to be helping him out at this point. So I'm fading Pierce purely because, one, I don't think he's going to be 100% healthy this season, but also, I like some of his other pass-catching competition in the Colts offense, Tyler Warren and Josh Downs, a lot more than I like Pierce for this year. Pierce is not going to be a high-volume guy like Warren or Downs would be. Again, he only caught 47 passes last year, so he's a guy that's a lot more dependent on the big play. And if he's not right with his ankle, and he's having trouble getting separation during the course of the year as he tries to get himself right from a physical standpoint, then I'm just not sure how you can feel good about drafting him at the top of the 8th round and counting on him to be in your starting lineup week to week. And again, given that I have more interest in Josh Downs than I do Pierce himself, and Downs can be had even further down the draft board, I don't think there's much of a decision to make here. Alec Pierce is a fade. I'm completely avoiding him this season. At the 803, we have Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And again, there's just not a lot to be excited about here with a guy like Godwin. On the positive side of things, Godwin is now more than a year removed from that dislocated ankle that he suffered 2 seasons ago that cost him the second half of the 2024 season and really limited him when he returned last year. Tampa Bay really had to bring him along slowly, and he suffered several setbacks along the way that caused him to miss even more time a year ago. At the very least, that should no longer be a factor. Godwin should be 100% available and ready to go week to week. But I just think the ceiling is non-existent for Godwin at this point. He's much more of a floor play, a guy that you can plug into your flex spot on any given week and get some kind of decent production, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 fantasy points. But the days of Chris Godwin providing league-winning upside are just over. He's no longer going to be the number one option in this offense. That role now belongs to Emeka Egbuka, and he also has two young up-and-coming receivers in Jalen McMillan and Ted Hurst, who's having a phenomenal training camp, that are coming up right behind him in the pecking order, and they're going to take more and more workload away from Godwin as they develop and get more comfortable in the offense. So Godwin at the 803 is just not an exciting pick that you can make in fantasy. He's more of a name brand recognition guy that really isn't going to bring that much to the table at this point in his career. At the 804, we have J.K. Dobbins of the Denver Broncos. And I don't know what more we need to say about J.K. Dobbins at this point. We've seen this story play out year after year after year with Dobbins. He just can't make it through a full season. Even if he gives you some kind of decent production to start things off, you know it's only a matter of time before you wake up on a Tuesday or a Wednesday morning after they've played over the weekend, and you get that injury report, and you see the news that Dobbins has made his way onto the IR. And even when he was healthy and playing for Denver last year, it wasn't like you were missing out on some league-winning running back. Dobbins topped out at around 15 to 16 points per game. There was no spiked weeks for him, no games where he reached the 20-point mark. So I just don't think you're missing out on anything with J.K. Dobbins at the 804. It's a pick that carries very low upside, and it's a draft pick that you know is probably not going to make it to the end of the season on your roster. It's a guy that's going to go to IR at some point. You're going to end up dropping him. It's a pick that really is just going to be wasted when you look at the grand scheme of things. So absolutely no interest from me in J.K. Dobbins at the 804. Again, this is something that I'm more than happy to pass along to my league mates and let them be the ones to wake up to the IR news midway through the season. Coming in at the 805, we have Justin Herbert, quarterback of the Chargers. For Justin Herbert, Herbert's been a bit of a disappointment since his second season. The biggest thing with Herbert has been the decline in his touchdown passes. In that second season, Herbert threw for 38, and he's not touched the 30 touchdown mark since that second season. The highest that he's thrown for has been 26, which he did last year. The one thing that really helped Herbert last year, though, and helped him finish as the QB10, his best finish since that second season, was that Herbert ran a lot more last season than he had ever done previously in his career, finishing with just under 500 rushing yards. Herbert now gets the offensive coordinator upgrade with Mike McDaniel coming to town. And McDaniel has always led a prolific offense, and even got Tua Tagovailoa to once lead the league in passing yardage with over 4,600 passing yards back in 2023. So if McDaniel was able to get that level of production out of Tua, imagine what he could potentially get out of Justin Herbert, especially given how loaded the Chargers are across the board at the skill positions. And it feels like the best way to get exposure to the Chargers offense really might be just to get exposure to Justin Herbert, because it's going to be very difficult to tell which one of these Chargers skill position pieces, whether it's the wide receivers, tight ends, or the running backs, are going to go off in any given week. So Herbert in this range, certainly not a bad option at all. I myself still prefer to wait on quarterback in this range, but if you look at the board in the 8th round and you really don't feel good about the options in front of you, and looking at those options, I couldn't blame you if that's the way you felt, then I certainly wouldn't have any problem going for Justin Herbert in this range. So while I could be talked into Justin Herbert in this range, I absolutely could not be talked into the next guy, which is Quentin Johnston going at the 806. Quentin Johnston last year starts out the year on fire coming out of the gate. He had 4 strong performances weeks 1 through 4. The rest of the season, however, he completely falls off the map. He only has 3 games where he finishes with 15 or more fantasy points. And this is another one of those cases where I just look at the ADP here and I'm just like, what are we doing? Quentin Johnston at the 806, a guy who's been nothing but frustrating and inconsistent throughout his career. And yes, he gets the play caller upgrade in Mike McDaniel, but again, there's so many mouths to feed in this offense. Can you really sit there and tell me that you're going to feel good about plugging Quentin Johnston in even as your flex on any given week? For someone as volatile as Quentin Johnston to be going this earlier, and there's just so many options that I'd rather have that are further down the board. Give me Josh Downs, give me Jaden Higgins, give me Jaden Reed, give me Stephon Diggs, give me Deebo Samuel. All these guys have much better floors and similar upside as Quentin Johnston. There's no way I'm taking him at this spot. Up next at the 807, it doesn't get much better. We've got Kyle Monangai from the Chicago Bears. And I love Kyle Monangai. He was a guy that I was very much in on last year, got several shares of him in my dynasty leagues, very satisfied with how those picks have played out for me. But in redraft at this range, you just can't take a guy like this early. As much as people might not want to admit this, DeAndre Swift isn't going away. And for Kyle Monangai to pay off this ADP, you need Swift to go down with a significant injury for an extended amount of time. If Swift is healthy for the whole season, then Monangai is unstartable, because it's going to be impossible to predict the games that he happens to spike and fall into the end zone here and there. Monangai is a nice player, but he's not at the same level as David Montgomery, where he's going to command 180 touches just by serving as this team's 1B. If you draft Kyle Monangai in round 8 and there's no DeAndre Swift injury, then you've wasted your round 8 pick. At this range, I'd much rather be going after Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt or Jonathan Brooks. Those are two guys that have much clearer paths to becoming the RB1s on their team. Up next at the 808, we have Michael Pittman Jr. of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I definitely think that Pittman is one of the better picks that you can get in round 8 at this point. Unlike DK Metcalf, Michael Pittman is a much better fit for Aaron Rodgers at this stage in his career. Pittman is a guy that thrives on short area targets and volume. And Aaron Rodgers at this stage in his career is going to be looking to get the ball out quickly. He's not going to look to hang around in the pocket too long and get crushed at age 43. So Pittman, I think, matches up really well with what Rodgers needs at this point in his career. And being drafted as the wide receiver 41 right now, it's not going to take a lot for Pittman to pay off this ADP and exceed the value on it. Pittman finished as a wide receiver 2 last season, finishing as the wide receiver 18, and he did it with just 80 catches for over 700 yards and 7 touchdowns. Those are pretty modest numbers, and they're very much repeatable in this situation in Pittsburgh. So I would be perfectly fine going with Pittman in this range. This is a guy that's going to bring a high floor every week, and he's a guy that you're going to be able to depend on to go out and get you between 10 and 15 fantasy points out of your wide receiver 3 or flex spot. There might not be a ceiling for Pittman to finish as a wide receiver 1, but the volume alone is going to prop him up and make it so easy for him to outperform a wide receiver 41 ADP. At the 809, we have Jaxon Dart of the New York Giants. And Dart last season in his rookie year was very impressive. He was able to finish as the QB 14 despite only appearing in 14 games, and despite not having his number 1 receiver, Malik Neighbors, for the entirety of the season. And while Dart's passing numbers weren't much to write home about, only 2,200 yards and 15 touchdown passes, his actual play on the field spoke for itself. The fact that he was able to keep the Giants relevant just week to week with the cast of poor wide receivers that he was given to work with all year really spoke volumes about what his ceiling could be in the future. And Dart was able to keep himself fantasy relevant even without the passing numbers through his rushing on the ground. Dart ran for just under 500 yards and scored 9 touchdowns on the ground last season. The problem with that rushing style, though, was that Dart often left himself susceptible to injury, and several times during last season he dealt with concussion issues. And the risk of injury here definitely makes it a little harder to get on board with him as the QB9. But the bigger issue that I have with Jaxon Dart is I have concerns about his offensive coordinator being able to elevate him and his skill position guys around him. I don't like the hire of Matt Nagy at all. I think it was a terrible decision by John Harbaugh. When Matt Nagy took over as the offensive coordinator of the Chiefs 3 years ago, the Chiefs were literally the top-ranked offense in the NFL. Immediately, in Nagy's first season, they fell to 15th and 16th in total yards per game and total points per game, and those numbers only got worse. So Nagy takes a top-tier offense and turns it into a bottom-tier offense, and this is him working with a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback in Patrick Mahomes. So with that in mind, looking at the decline that happened to the Chiefs and Mahomes under Nagy's watch, why in the world would I have any confidence that he's going to be the guy to come in here and help Jaxon Dart and the Giants offense take the next step forward? It really is so important to have a good offensive coordinator, a good play caller, and a good scheme in place for some guys in fantasy football to thrive and be at their best. In this case, I just have zero confidence, none whatsoever, that Matt Nagy is that guy to bring out the best in Jaxon Dart, and with that in mind, Jaxon Dart as the QB9 is going to be a fade for me. Coming in at the 810, we have Blake Corum of the Rams, another RB handcuff that's going way too early. And very similar to Kyle Monangai, who's going just a few picks before him, I don't know why in the world you would draft Blake Corum this early. For him to pay off this ADP, he's going to need a Kyren Williams injury, just like Monangai would need a DeAndre Swift injury. And also, even though Corum is going to be worked into the lineup a little more regularly than a guy like Kyle Monangai would be, he's not going to have access to the high-value touches. He's not a threat to take receiving work away from Kyren Williams. Blake Corum in the last 2 seasons has caught exactly 15 passes, 8 last year, 7 before that. And while he might fall into the end zone here and there, he's not going to be the primary guy in the goal line over Kyren Williams, a guy who for 3 straight years has scored double-digit red zone touchdowns. So again, I don't get the appeal in drafting Blake Corum this early. If you don't get the Kyren Williams injury, then when are you going to feel good about plugging Blake Corum into your lineup? So Blake Corum at the 8-10 is going to be a total fade for me. Again, you're just so much better off going for a guy like Jonathan Brooks or Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt that are going several rounds later than this that actually have real paths to taking over their backfields. At the 8-11, we have Dak Prescott coming in as the QB9, and at that range, Dak is a really nice value. When Dak has been healthy over the last 5 years, he's just posting absolutely elite fantasy numbers. In his last 4 healthy seasons, Dak has been the QB8, the QB2, the QB6, and the QB3. He averages north of 4,500 passing yards and between 30 and 35 touchdowns. And the environment in Dallas is still set up for Dak to just thrive from a fantasy perspective. He's still got 2 elite targets in CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. He's got a great tight end in Jake Ferguson. And even wide receiver 3 Ryan Flournoy has gotten great reviews out of training camp this year. The Cowboys also do not have a great running game behind Prescott. Javonte Williams had a nice start to last season, but he really faded down the stretch, and the Cowboys are also going to be in a ton of shootouts again this year. So Dak Prescott, there's no reason why he shouldn't continue to put up all kinds of prolific passing numbers, and if he stays healthy, he's going to outperform his ADP as the QB10. And then the last pick in this round, coming in at the 8-12, is tight end George Kittle. And right off the bat, I'm going to tell you, this is just another ADP in round 8 that I think is just outrageous. I can't be spending an 8th round pick on a 32-year-old tight end coming off of a torn Achilles. And even though there's a possibility that George Kittle is ready to play week 1, he's not going to be at the same level of what you typically expect George Kittle to be at. Also keep in mind, it's going to be a lot harder for George Kittle to spike in touchdowns now that a guy like Mike Evans is here. Evans is just going to be a red zone monster when healthy, and it's going to be so much harder for Kittle coming off of his torn Achilles to make an impact in the red zone when the 49ers are just going to be lobbing up fades to Mike Evans every time they get down there. So I'm just completely out on George Kittle at this ADP. Again, I just think the late round tight end options, Isaiah Likely's, Chikakonkwo's, other guys like AJ Barner, are so much more valuable than Kittle at this stage of his career, and I'd much rather be targeting them with a double-digit round pick than spending an 8th for Kittle coming off of a major injury. And that's going to do it for this one, guys. So with round 8, this is another pretty bad stretch of the draft. The one guy that you have a little bit of upside with here at the skill positions is Makai Lemon, and even him, you have concerns about the hamstring and the passing volume in Philadelphia, so that's still not a pick that you're going to feel great about. And Michael Pittman is the other wide receiver in this range that I would be okay with going with. But even then, he's much more of a high-end floor play and doesn't really have a ceiling, but I still think there's a pretty good chance that he's going to outperform his wide receiver 41 ADP. And other than that, this whole round is just filled with all kinds of ugliness. Like, I don't feel good about guys like Alec Pierce or Chris Godwin or J.K. Dobbins at this stage, and I don't know what we're doing with RB handcuffs like Kyle Monangai or Blake Corum being drafted this high, and I don't understand why we have George Kittle off of his torn Achilles at the back end of this round either. This is a range in the draft where I think the best strategy is to just hope that one of the other targets that we had from round 7 falls into this range again, or if you're not going to take one of the quarterbacks that are going, like Justin Herbert or Dak Prescott, then maybe there's another guy that you're high on from round 9 or beyond that you go a little ahead of ADP on just to secure them, which I think is a much better move than settling for one of these unexciting, uninspiring picks that are currently available to you in round 8. But that's going to do it again for this one, guys. I thank you all so much for watching. If you like the content, please consider subscribing and leaving a like, and I will talk to you next time when we go over the guys in round 9.